Most professionals think career advantage comes from what can be taught. They assume the edge belongs to the person with the better certification, the newer software skill, the sharper presentation style, or the faster adoption curve. That is the wrong map. In the modern enterprise, the most durable career advantage is not a teachable skill. It is trusted judgment with skin in the game. That distinction matters more now because AI and software are making taught capability cheaper every quarter. Research can be accelerated, analysis can be drafted, documentation can be structured, project updates can be summarized, even strategic language can be generated on demand. The supply of competent-looking work is rising fast. When supply rises, price falls. So the market value of being informed, articulate, and technically current does not disappear, but it compresses. What once looked like a premium increasingly behaves like a baseline. This is where many professionals misread what is happening around them. They see more learning options and conclude the answer is more learning. Another course, another framework, another badge, another system. But the enterprise does not pay a premium simply because knowledge exists. It pays a premium when someone can use imperfect information to make decisions that survive consequences. That is the career advantage that cannot be taught at scale, because consequence cannot be simulated cleanly in mass instruction. Judgment under consequence is different from intelligence. It is different from effort. It is different from expertise. It is the ability to decide when incentives conflict, when information is incomplete, when timing matters, when trade-offs are real, and when the cost of being wrong lands on an actual budget, team, or operating metric. A model can recommend, a dashboard can signal, a consultant can advise, a manager can repeat best practice. But when a decision affects headcount, margin, customer trust, legal exposure, or execution risk, the organization starts looking for something much scarcer than knowledge. That capability is built through exposure, not instruction. You do not develop it mainly by collecting information. You develop it by sitting close to decisions where trade-offs are visible. You develop it by watching who gets blamed, who gets protected, who can delay action, who has authority to override process, and which metrics matter only in theory versus in practice. Over time, you begin to see the enterprise not as an org chart, but as a consequence system. Real authority often appears where downside is concentrated. Once you see that system clearly, your career behavior changes. You stop trying to look broadly impressive and start trying to become locally trusted where stakes are real. You stop optimizing only for output volume and start optimizing for decision usefulness. You stop presenting work as intellectual performance and start shaping it as risk-reducing leverage for the people who own outcomes. That shift is where compensation diverges. In many white-collar roles, especially in the six-figure squeeze, professionals are still rewarded for throughput, reliability, and visible competence. But those are the exact layers now exposed to compression. If software can increase throughput and AI can improve first-pass quality, then being efficient is no longer enough to create pricing power. Efficiency without consequence ownership becomes easier to substitute. What remains scarce is consequence navigation. Can you tell a leader which number matters most when two dashboards disagree? Can you explain why a process that looks efficient on paper will fail inside a political organization? Can you identify the hidden cost bearer before a decision gets approved? Can you see when a proposed automation will save labor in one budget while creating risk in another? Can you distinguish a temporary exception from a structural change? Those are not classroom advantages. They are enterprise advantages. This is why some professionals keep advancing even when others with similar resumes stall. It is not always charisma. It is not always favoritism. Often it is that the advancing person has become decision adjacent in a way the others have not. Senior leaders trust them not because they know more facts, but because their interpretation survives contact with reality. Their judgment is expensive to replace because it has been shaped by repeated exposure to consequences. And it creates a useful career test. Ask yourself a simple question. If your current work became twice as fast tomorrow, would your value to the organization double, stay flat, or fall? For many professionals, the honest answer is that faster execution would not materially increase leverage because the work itself does not influence enough consequential decisions. That is the signal. It means your development problem is not speed, it is proximity to consequence. If your work can be accelerated without changing risk, your contribution may be useful, but it is not yet strategically priced. There is also a political layer most people ignore. Enterprises rarely reward the person who works hardest on the clearest task. They reward the person who reduces uncertainty for the roles that carry visible accountability. In other words, the people with real skin in the game. When a leader trusts your read of a problem, your output stops being labor and starts becoming leverage. That is when compensation becomes less tied to production volume and more tied to interpretive value. You are no longer paid mainly for doing the work. You are paid for helping someone else move with less fear. So the strategic move is not to stop learning. It is to learn in a more targeted way. Build expertise, yes, but attach it to a budget, an operational risk, a revenue dependency, a compliance exposure, or a capital allocation question. Move toward work where trade-offs cannot be hidden. Volunteer for initiatives where cross-functional incentives collide. Pay attention to who must sign off, who can veto, and who carries downside when plans fail. That is where teachable skill gets converted into non-teachable advantage. Information becomes more valuable when it is anchored to consequences that cannot be ignored. The market ahead will not reward professionals for being capable. Capability is becoming baseline. The premium will go to those who can make capability usable inside imperfect institutions. In other words, the people who rise will not just produce knowledge, they will convert uncertainty into movement. They will make ambiguous situations easier to price, govern, and act on. That is why judgment compounds while general skill compresses. One scales supply, the other absorbs friction. In enterprise settings, friction often determines who gets trusted, funded, and protected. That is why the career advantage that cannot be taught is becoming the one that matters most. Not because knowledge is irrelevant, but because knowledge without judgment is now abundant. And in an economy flooded with competent output, the rarest professional is the one who can be trusted when the answer is unclear, the stakes are real, and someone still has to decide. They will be the people whose judgment keeps proving usable when the enterprise has to move before certainty arrives.